I'm very happy to welcome the Sri Lankan High Commissioner to New Delhi, His Excellency Prasad Karyavasam. Excellency, thank you very much for finding the time to speak to South Asia Monitor. As you may be aware, this is a platform where we are trying to look at issues from the larger South Asian perspective and how the individual countries relate to this rather intangible but highly desirable idea of trying to, first of all, understand what is a South Asian identity and how do individual countries relate to it. I mean, the geography of the region is familiar. India's own contrast with the neighbors is also something that is a given. But given the very special relationship that India and Sri Lanka have, how do you see this issue of South Asian identity in the context of the 21st century and Sri Lanka's own contribution to nurture this and take it forward?
My pleasure to appear on South Asia Monitor. And the topic that you have is a primary topic is something that I think is very, very important topic for South Asians, given that we are in 21st century and South Asia is eager to get on with this century and make this Asian century. So in that context, and given the history of this region, which has great civilization links, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, we have 2,500 years of recorded history, which is connected with the Indian subcontinent. And given all that, this topic is important. And to my mind, we also have to be mindful what is South Asia, whether it's Bangladesh to Pakistan and Afghanistan, or it is wider than that.
Well, just for the record, Sam has taken a very inclusive approach, and we would like to look at the region as being extending from Afghanistan to Myanmar, and South Asia also morphs into the equivalent of Southern Asia. Right. So our motto is inclusive.
Right. So I think that's the area perhaps South Asia historically has been. Identity is defined in many ways. Identity is defined not only geographically, also with values and systems and ethos. In that sense, South Asia has a lot of things in common. But given that over a long period of time, like for Sri Lanka, 2,500 years, we have things in common, but we also have grown separately, creating distinct identities. So we need to find unity in diversity. And to find unity in diversity, both within South Asian countries and across South Asia, we have things to do. We have things to promote. Things to promote are that what is common for us. And there's a lot of things common for us. Based on that, we can easily create, and we are creating, a South Asian identity. In fact, SARC is one of those efforts. Today we are trying to create a SARC brand like. We have to have a brand name for South Asian identity. Of course, India has a special responsibility. India is right in the middle of the South Asian nations and predominant power.
And also provides the traction for economic and trade-related issues. And here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always said as an analyst that the bilateral trade agreement between Sri Lanka and India is actually a very good example of how a smaller neighbor can actually benefit if there is the right politics in terms of making a relationship or an agreement work. My own figure says that over the last 10 years, if you look at from where we started before the free trade agreement, the increase in trade is almost fourfold. And perhaps there is a lesson there for the rest of the region in how to make SAFTA work.
Yes. India-Sri Lanka free trade agreement was the first free trade agreement for both countries. It was very interesting. Both India and Sri Lanka was looking at a soft landing to teach each country people that free trade is not a bad thing. Yeah. So first for India, first for Sri Lanka. Now it has been there for over 12 years. Bilateral trade has increased exponentially. Today it's touching $5 billion. I think India and Sri Lanka per capita has largest trade exchange between the South Asian
And we started at 500-600 million, if I remember
right. That's right. So that's a success story. It has, by and large, promoted trade both ways. And there's more can be done. In fact, we are looking at how to expand that. It's a good example of the fact that free trade is not a bad thing.
And it can benefit both sides.
Benefit both sides. Benefit both sides. Certainly it benefit both sides. It's it could be a template for other countries. Now Sri Lanka has one with Pakistan, and we think SAFTA is something that we should vigorously pursue in such a manner that it become more operational and more useful. But bilateral agreements have taken precedence over SAFTA.
But I think this is something that, as you rightly said, that the political leadership and the business leadership in each South Asian country would have to really, I think, revisit and see how they can arrive at the kind of consensus to make these move. But if I could, very sort of shift gears over here and from trade and economic issues, really talk about the political relationship, particularly as far as India and Sri Lanka are concerned. Now, one issue which is animating, I would say definitely the consciousness and the texture of the bilateral relationship India-Sri Lanka is about the vote at the UNHRC. Now, most of us follow the media both in India and in Sri Lanka. As the High Commissioner, I'm sure you're very aware and sensitive to the dynamic of India's domestic politics. Now, I saw some of the commentary in the Sri Lankan media, which was also, I would say, very, very critical. And there has been a turn of phrase which we do not normally associate with the India-Sri Lankan relationship. So how would you, interpret this, and what do you think the future looks like given the backdrop of the India-Sri Lanka political relationship?
First of all, the resolution in Geneva, sponsored, promoted by United States, extra-regional power, is totally uncalled for, unwarranted. There was no reason to have a resolution, because the resolution, if you look at what it promotes, is something very simple. It's asking Sri Lanka to implement Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission reports. Our own report, we are being asked to implement by the international body. Report is just after 3 months after the report was published. We find it irrational. But sometimes some measures are irrational in the international system. So, and therefore, for us, the resolution has not much meaning. In that context, we let the resolution pass. So it's all over. Each country decided to vote according to what they feel they should do according to their own national interests. And so we stop at that. And we get on with life.
Oh, that's very good. It's very gratifying to hear that that's the way you approach it. But let me press this point, Excellency, if I may, which is that, this whole issue of the Tamil population of Sri Lanka, this is not of recent origin. I am old enough to remember a Sri Lanka in the mid-1970s, when perhaps you had just joined your foreign service, and the nature of the sensitivity on this issue. Now, almost 3 decades later, after the way in which the Sri Lankan government has dealt with the LTTE, how would you characterize, and frankly, you're speaking to a forum which is trying to reach out to South Asia as a collective, how would you explain or interpret, I'm not asking you for an explanation, I withdraw that word, how would you interpret the current approach to the Sri Lankan Tamils and the kind of concern that is exuded in India, particularly in Tamil Nadu, a sense that they are not getting the right constitutional deal, which they deserve, and it is their right?
First of all, we find most of the Tamil Nadu population is ill-informed of the real situation on the ground, especially after the decimation of LTT, which was a terrorist organization, which has harmed both Sri Lanka and India. We have done a lot of things in terms of rehabilitation, reconstruction work. A lot of things are happening. That is one element, rehabilitation, reconstruction. We also work on reconciliation. We also work on measures to bring Tamil people back into the mainstream. We are looking at what we call restorative justice, not retributive justice. Retribution is not part of our grain. Retribution is very alien to South Asians. Unfortunately, those Sri Lankan Tamils who are living in Western countries for long years, who are now used to Western way of thinking and doing things, are focusing on retribution because some of them are supporting LTT. and their influence both in Sri Lankan in Tamil Nadu is affecting a negative effect on the whole issue, and the issue has been clouded. Therefore, it is not taking the right approach. So therefore, right approach is not being taken, and we are unable to therefore proceed in the manner that we want to find a homegrown solution for our own issues. We as Sri Lankans, we as a multi-ethnic, multicultural nation, we are the first who want to live in peace. We are the first who want to make every Sri Lankan feel that they have the dignity, their equal rights. But we have to build something that is sustainable, where those who are living in the country can agree. And that's what we are doing. We would not want any externally induced solution to Sri Lanka. And in that context, there is no room for separatism, no room for alienation of people. It is only we have to include everybody, like India has done. However, we should be allowed to do our own model. Imposing any other country's model, including India's model on Sri Lanka, is not a solution.
No, that I think is accepted. But all I would urge you, High Commissioner, is that you are speaking in a forum where I can assure you that what you are saying would be noticed very closely by people definitely in Tamil Nadu, and even the larger, as I said, entity of South Asians and the diaspora. And I can only wish you well, and we hope that Sri Lanka can evolve its own political solution. But we are aware, and we have in the past interacted and received many of your most eminent politicians, both of Sinhala and Tamil origin, and they are statesmen who have said some very, I would say, significant assertions made. But the problem has remained. So as I said, I only wish you well in terms of finding that political solution. But there remains, as I said, a sense here in India, those who may not be familiar with the nitty-gritty of Sri Lankan politics and the whole genealogy, that perhaps the Tamils are not getting the kind of constitutional space that they need. But I'll leave this. I don't want to press this issue any further. But go to another point, which is that the other area of concern definitely in India, and this comes up ever so often, is the nature of the Sri Lanka-China relationship. And I do want to draw attention to Hambantota. Now, I'm a security analyst, and my own reading is, and I've spoken to some of your predecessors on the subject, that there was a point when the Sri Lankan government had formally approached the government of India about Hambantota, but perhaps the Indian response was not as forthcoming because we did not have the capacity at that time. And that is when Sri Lanka looked at other options. This is my understanding. So I'd request you to shed some light on this, about Hambantota particularly, and the nature of the Sri Lanka-China relationship, and what has been said officially from Colombo, that India need not be unduly concerned about that bilateral relationship because it's not being pursued at the cost of India's interests.
Hambantota port is a port developed and built by China, but it is our port. No other country owns that port. Sri Lanka Port Authority runs that port. We are simply using our strategic location for commercial purposes, and that's the intention of Hambantota port. If you look at the sea lanes, one of the world's most busiest sea lanes are just going by Hambantota. And as the Asian growth escalates, which is happening already, we are growing at 8%, you are growing at 8%, India is growing at 8%, China is growing similarly. The growth story will require greater connectivity, greater sea capacity, and we want to create that facility first for our region. It is created for our region. Our region includes India, Sri Lanka, and all South Asian countries. We wish Hambantota becomes a port, hub for all South Asian countries to make their businesses more efficient. From Colombo Port to New York City, it's only 14 days for a container to go. Colombo Port is already, we are expanding that. 70% of Colombo cargo is also Indian transshipment. It creates efficiencies in Indian subcontinent. Hambantota should also create efficiencies in the subcontinent. We will benefit, everybody else will benefit. Because if you take the big ships in the world today are not going all over. They just go around the world. You need the transshipment ports. So Hambantota purpose is that it is our port. All South Asians are welcome to use it. Chinese built and they left. So we run the port and we welcome Indian investment in the port, in fact. For us, it's simple as that. With regard to China, China has been a long friend. But India is our closest friend. We live in Indian subcontinent. We are part of South Asian identity, which we are talking about, which we want to create, as well we want to support. So India, like our president said, is our relative and others are friends. But China is a very reliable friend. So we will always nurture that friendship. But India and China relationship not a zero sum for Sri Lanka.
That's, as I said, very reassuring to hear, because there is always this perception that the nature of the Sri Lanka-China relationship could perhaps take the kind of orientation that a lot of people in India feel the China-Pakistan relationship has taken, which, as I said, has had very negative security connotations for India, especially in the light of the Mumbai 2008 incident. But again, let me move away from here to the issue of terrorism. Sri Lanka has dealt with the LTTE in a very, very definitive manner. But as far as South Asia is concerned, the larger challenge of terrorism is something that the region has to deal with. You are familiar, it's come up at the highest political level also. Now, you are a diplomat of considerable experience. You have been in the UN. You have represented your country in other capitals. How do you see the approach to terrorism and South Asia? I mean, I really want you to step out of your Sri Lankan identity and look at this in the larger context of the challenge of terrorism and how the region needs to address it.
Terrorism is mainly a political weapon used by non-state actors to achieve their political ends in South Asia. And that is not acceptable by civilized world today. We South Asians are now democratic nations. So there should be democratic means, there should be consultative mechanism to achieve political ends. Any non-state actor or any state that promotes terrorism is condemnable. We don't support that. We feel we should cooperate with each other to deny non-state actors the ability to wreak havoc on civilian population. And that should happen now, it should happen always. Any measure by any country, even remotely, encourage terrorism is unpardonable, because that will hit back. We have enough examples in our region as well. When some elements supported terrorist groups, they came back and hit them. I don't want to go into details, you know what I'm talking about. There had been many instances. So if you use extreme elements with violent intentions like terrorist attacks to achieve political ends, it's not going to solve any problem. We have our example in Sri Lanka. We had a cancer which we had removed by operation. We don't want that to come up again. And we want all of South Asians, especially India, to be very mindful and be very careful as to not to let such abominable forces to emerge again.
I think that point is well taken, because I think if you look at the South Asian experience, if you look at the last 30 odd years, I would say, every South Asian country has its own experience of terrorism as a phenomenon, and the non-state entity and the degree to which the state has either given direct support or some kind of tacit support. And maybe this is an issue where the South Asian scholar, the South Asian analyst, the South Asian student need to be looking at each country's experience and what are the lessons. Because here I think there is a challenge for us, which is the most recent variant. I mean, you have dealt with the LTTE. But what we now often refer to as jihadi terror is something which has a virulence, and we are seeing it even as we speak, that the way in which certain groups and certain individuals have been notified by the international community and what it means for the extended region. And I do hope that our academics and analysts look at this. But let me quickly turn to two last issues, if I may, Excellency. One is that when we talk about the integration in South Asia, there is a trade and economic, dynamic, which hopefully will get, in a way, I would say, the right kind of nurturing through the arrangement of SAFTA. But there are various other connectivities and integration that we should be looking at. And here, perhaps, the youth has a very important role to play. So if you have any thoughts about the integration, the effort at integration, which can go beyond what countries are already doing, I mean, what you as a diplomat are doing, what the business communities are doing, are there any other avenues that could be pursued because of globalization, because of modernity? And if so, what is it that Sri Lanka would like to identify, or you personally would like to identify, when we talk about South Asia and its integration?
Our potential as South Asian to promote South Asian identity and also for economic development depends on two matters. One is how well we integrate our economies, but with keeping each one's distinct capacity. That's a very challenging thing. It's easy to say, but challenging. We need to give our youth opportunities for upward mobility, which they seek. And we also must train them to get them out of the box, think out of the box, to focus on innovation and entrepreneurship. Without innovation, we will never be able to reach the level of to realize the dream of an Asian century. If you still look at, a lot of innovation still take place in the Western world. We are only following them. We need to create our own capacity to innovate. And for that, it's very important that we integrate our system so that youth across South Asia can share each other's experience and benefit from each other's abilities and become very innovative, very forward-looking people who can realize their dream of upward mobility. So I again focus on this word. Innovation requires, again, excellence in education. Our education should have that cutting-edge character. And there's still a lot more work to be done in South Asia. We cannot keep on exporting our best brains to the Western countries, who then they go there and they innovate there, and we then again return. That's not the way to do it. Those brains should be retained here, and those brains should be given opportunity to traverse the South Asian region without any problem. We have very, very difficult visa regimes in South Asia. How can youth experience each other? How can youth learn from each other? That's not happening. We have to create that enabling environment for our youth to take us to the next 21st century for our greater good.
I suppose there is a very modest attempt in the South Asian University, which has just been launched. And you're absolutely right. It's not enough for South Asian brains to go to the United States and to America. We have to create that kind of an environment. Let me share with you, Excellency, that the South Asia Monitor is actually in the process of trying to set up a youth forum here in Delhi, and we do hope that the Sri Lankan students in India, in Delhi, will participate robustly. We'll definitely request you to speak to them. Now, here's my last question. It's not a trick question, so you can give me a straight answer if you would like to, which is that Sri Lanka will host the T20 in September, the ICC. So it's a straightforward question. Who will win it?
I was last year, just 1 year back, I observed Sri Lanka getting beaten by India at the final in Mumbai. So I hope this time if you meet India, we can beat India. But of course, as you know, T20 is still T20 is little more difficult to predict than even 50-over cricket. I believe India has a good side, but at this point it's very difficult to give a prediction. But we look forward to the tournament, and we look forward to welcome all the nations. And let's put it this way: if Sri Lanka can win it, let India win.
As always, cricket should win. Right. On that note, Excellency, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.